Mission Force Erie, and sponsored by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Northwestern Pennsylvania. I have the honor of introducing our speaker. Hope Lloyd is a fitness trainer, and she is certified through the International Sports and Sciences Association. She is the Director of Trauma, Specific Services for the Voice of Hope International. Hope specializes in helping women and girls overcome the abusive effects that they have endured. She teaches and guides women and girls on how to utilize exercise as a tool, as a type of therapy. Hope has firsthand experience of the incredible and positive benefits of exercise because she is a survivor of human trafficking. Hope is here today to share her story, and equally important, how she worked to move forward after years of trauma. Her experience with exercise as a healing mechanism has helped her take control of her mental and emotional health. She is a dynamic speaker, and she is a powerful voice for those who have been victims of human trafficking. Hope is a survivor, and after talking with her to prepare today, I have to tell you, she's not just a survivor. Hope is a hero, a bona fide, real-life hero. So during Hope's presentation today, we ask that you remain muted. Please use the chat box for any questions that you may have. At the end of her presentation, there will be time to have her respond to questions, and Deb and I will collect them out of the chat room. Our meeting ends today at 11. However, because this is such an important issue and Hope is such a great speaker, if we aren't done at 11, if there's still questions that people want to talk about, we're going to keep the meeting open. If you need to leave at 11, that's fine, just log out. But we will continue on until we are finished. Hope's presentation, again, sponsored by the Sisters of St. Joseph, will be recorded and will be available for you to use educationally throughout your programs. And now I turn the presentation over to Hope.
Thank you so much, Betsy. That was really sweet of you, that introduction. I'm really excited to be here. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to talk with an amazing group of people, like what I just heard about everyone, how they're doing things to impact the fight against trafficking and your projects and tools. And I'm just really amazed and very encouraged. 10 years ago, none of this was happening, so just to see how much work everyone's putting in and taking this seriously, and I'm just, it's really amazing, and I'm really impressed by everyone and their efforts. So as Betsy mentioned, my name is Hope. I am a survivor of trafficking, labor trafficking to be specific, and hopefully something in today's talk will maybe clarify a question you've had about trafficking, or maybe will bring up a question you have, and I'd be happy to address that, answer it if I can. So I just wanted to get into it, like, what is trafficking? So trafficking is essentially a modern day form of human slavery. And how does trafficking happen? So a lot of people assume that trafficking happens by kidnapping. So let's say you're at Walmart and someone kidnaps your child. Well, although that could happen, and that is a reality, and that does happen, it's often most likely not how trafficking occurs. It's usually the perpetrator is usually known by the victim for weeks, months, sometimes years. So it's most often someone we know. And the perpetrator typically uses something called grooming, whether that's online or in person. They will groom the victim and play on their insecurities. So let's say you've got a really bad home life and your parents are neglectful. They will use that. They will build a relationship with you. Typically, they're very charismatic. They want your trust, and it's a slow process. So over time, they'll gain that trust with you, and they'll lure you in. So now you have an emotional connection with them. And from there, they can basically have their way. So a lot of the times with younger middle schoolers, I often see it a lot with middle schoolers, it's a confusing time for someone that age. And if the home life is not a positive place, it's not a safe place, if they don't feel safe, they will look outside outside of their home, and that's perfect trap for a perpetrator, because that's exactly what they're looking for. So that's just one way. That's probably the most common. If traffickers, some red flags are, if someone's offering you the world, I can give you, everything you want. You'd never want for anything. Clothes, friendships. I could get you into school. You'd have an amazing life. Like, you would never want for anything. Usually the outlandish, larger than life promises, those are red flags. A little bit, I don't like to focus a lot on my past. I'm very much moving forward, and how we can heal, how we can overcome, and I don't like to get stuck in the past. However, I do think it's important to take a look and not forget, where you come from, and I do think it's a great tool to teach. So, I'll give a little overview of my background. When my mother, she's from India, and my biological dad's from England, and they were in arranged marriage. And my mother moved to England. It was her second language. When she moved, she lost connection with her family. At age 20 and 23, she had me and my sister. My biological dad was extremely abusive to her. He would rape her, beat her. But 30 something years ago in England, you're married, police didn't take that seriously. What do you mean you're being raped by your husband? He's your husband. You chose to marry him. And we've definitely come a long way, with women's rights since then, but that was the case, all those years ago. So he was abusive to us also, but definitely to her. And over time, things got a little worse, and it was just a lot for her to handle. 2 kids, she worked 3 jobs, she had a husband who was abusing her. So she was vulnerable. She's also in a place where it's not her first language. She's foreign. So she was just very, very vulnerable if you look at the situation. Now, one day at her church, some woman introduced herself to my mother, and she was a volunteer social worker from China. So this lady befriended our family, befriended my mother, and essentially weaseled her way into our life. I believe I was about 4 years old when I first met my perpetrator. Her name is Mercedes. And she essentially became like a second mother to us. Not by choice, but she definitely forced herself in our lives. She helped put my biological father in jail because he did a hit and run. He was a car driver. I think he was a taxi driver, but he did a hit and run, and she was able to show that he was abusive to my mom. So she helped put him in jail. And after that, she basically replaced his spot in our life. We would spend summer vacations in China. She adopted a little Filipino girl when I would go visit. She was extremely abusive early on. I was terrified of her. Nothing you did was right. Nothing I did was right. Everything was our fault. We were children, we were made to feel and to believe that we were just the worst people on planet Earth. So she would use punishments as cutting our hair, beating us with riding crops, pinning us against each other. She was just extremely manipulative and abusive. Yeah, so one day back in England, I remember Mercedes sitting in our living room, and she asked me if I would like to move with her to Spain, if I would like to live with her, because the little girl she adopted, the Filipino girl, would also be there, and she needed a sister. She said, I could give you an amazing life, you would have an amazing education, you'd have great friends, you'd rollerblade, you'd have an amazing social life. I'll keep you in contact with your mother, she's poor and she wants the best for you. And I just remember the feeling of, no, no, like I was definitely a mother's child, like definitely a mom's girl. And I, in my little body and little voice, said, no, thank you. I don't want to go with you. And I'll remember like it was yesterday, her sitting in that chair and just, I mean, the look on her face that someone told her the word no. It just, I will never forget the look on her face, like, wow, So a few weeks go by, and my mom, we used to go to a park called Richmond Park in England, if any of you are familiar. I love that park. And we'd often go by train. And my mom said, okay, we're going to go to the park. I was like, okay, I was all excited. But she seemed very down and very a little sad. And, children notice these things. Like, we don't always know what's going on, but we notice. So I noticed that. Next thing I know, we're on an airplane. And I thought, well, we never go to Richmond Park on an airplane. This is strange. And I asked her and she was just quiet. She started crying and didn't say anything. I thought, okay, that's strange. When we land and we get into the taxi and we're driving down the highway, I noticed like the highway signs, and they're in a language I don't understand. I can't read them. I thought, I just knew something was wrong. I just knew she's taking me to this woman. That's when it started setting in. So we get to the hotel. We're waiting for Mercedes and her biological daughter. One of the first instances I can, explain or try to paint a picture of how she was, her demeanor, her personality, the way she liked to control and show you that she was larger than life, and she owned the situation and owned the room. My mom got me a bottle of Coke, just a regular sugarcane Coca-Cola bottle, like never seen one in my life. I thought, oh, that's amazing. So we sit down, we wait for her. Mercedes gets there with her daughter, and she says, that's not your Coke, that's my daughter's. She picks it up, gives it to her daughter, and that might be a small thing, but to me, I thought, wow, that was her in front of my mother. So that was like her first like control. So that was just one instance, honestly. But over the years, I stayed in Spain. My mom left. Things honestly just went downhill from there. She was very rich. She lived in a very affluent neighborhood in Spain. I remember celebrities would go there. Like, she was definitely about her status. I grew up with my younger sister, who's Filipino, and then my biological sister came to join us. And nothing she promised came through fruition. So we did not go to school, not even homeschooled. We did not we did not leave the house. We did not have a social life like she promised. We did not talk to my mom like she promised to keep us connected. So all her promises did not happen. In fact, the opposite happened. We were beaten daily. My sisters and I, we cleaned the house, we cooked, she started adopting a lot of animals, dogs, cats, and they would be inside and they would mess the house up, and we'd be cleaning all the time. She had a little bell that she would ring, for our attention, and we slept on the floor in a little bedroll. And honestly, things stayed pretty bad for a long time. So we spent 6 years there, and then she moved to the United States. She met a pen pal via the internet, and this woman obviously was under her influence, became influenced by her charisma, and did a lot of work on her behalf. So she helped her buy a house in the United States, right here in Union County. Well, you guys aren't familiar with this area, but close to where I live here. Um, and eventually she brought us over. We were brought here on a 6-month visa. And this is where things get interesting because, being brought into a situation like this as a child, we did not have our paperwork or our legal documentations. We also did not realize what our rights are. So, I don't really, as a child, now I'm age 12, so I turned 13 when I got here. So at that age, I don't understand what a 6-month visa is. What does that mean if it runs out? So we get here the day that we were supposed to leave. Our visa expired. She turned the car around and, said she didn't want us to leave. So we became illegal here. So then she also used that against us. If you try to leave, if you try to run away, I will notify the police and they will bring you right back to me because you have no family that you're in contact with. You have no one other than me. I provide everything for you. So that was another scare tactic towards us and to her benefit because we did not know our rights. We were not allowed to read newspapers, watch the news, because that would educate us too much on the world and possibly, give us an out onto our situation and how to get out. So once we moved to the United States, things got progressively worse. The beatings were more. She put padlocks on the refrigerators. The dry storage was put in a cabinet in her bedroom. We would wear each of us would wear, well, one of us would wear a necklace with a string, like with the key for the refrigerator. So we'd have to follow each other around. So she created untrustingness towards each other. So we weren't allowed to be alone. We had to have a sister with us at all times. And even though we were watching each other and she had everything locked away, she would still accuse us. For instance, she'd have a bottle of orange juice in the refrigerator. She'd go run an errand, she'd come back, she'd look at the orange juice. She'd put a Sharpie marker where the orange juice stopped. And she'd say, "Oh, you stole orange juice." And we'd say, "No." And she wanted us to call her mummy. So we'd say, "No, mummy, I did not steal orange juice. I didn't touch it." And it didn't matter. It didn't matter what it was she was accusing you of. You would stand there. If it took 2 hours or all day, if it was evening, by the time that you confessed, you'd stand there all day until you confessed. And she would berate you, beat you, insult you, disrespect you. I mean, she would beat you into submission. So as a child, not having done what she accused you of, you're saying, "No, no, I didn't do that. I promise I didn't do that. I did not steal anything." You now have to say you weren't going to leave the room. Like, she'd strip you naked. This is how bad things would get. Just to embarrass you and degrade you and violate you, honestly, to nothing, to gain your respect and to gain, I don't know, a confession. So as a 13-year-old, you're like, okay, well, I just have to say I did it. So yes, mommy, I stole the orange juice. So then she'd say, okay, how did you do it? So now I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I didn't actually do it, but now I have to come up with an excuse of how did I do that? Why was my sister not with me when we're supposed to be together? So, it gets a lot deeper than that. But those things happen daily. And it just got to the point where we just knew we'd die. Like, the beatings were so horrendous that we just knew no one's going to know we're here. We're just going to die in this situation. So we were in a sort of like retirement neighborhood. It wasn't like a senior citizen retirement, like, residency. It was just a very well-off neighborhood, and we had like retired lawyers and doctors and attorneys that lived, you know, on this strip of road. Um, and she had built a reputation for herself because things were now leaking out, you know. Um, it had been what, 10 years by this point that we had been with her, and she loved animals. So she essentially made this house, gorgeous house. I mean, she just destroyed this house for a lot of animals. She'd go to auctions. We had rams, guinea pigs, pigeons, dogs, chickens, you name it, we had it. And in the house, outside of the house, she built like a miniature farm. So which was surprising because for someone who would want to lay low, and that's why we moved. Also, that's why we moved countries, not just cities or towns, but we moved entire countries every time she would get paranoid. So it was a little, when I look back, it's a little surprising that she made herself that well known, you know, because the people hated the animals, did not like her. They were actually trying to get a petition signed to get her removed from the neighborhood. So I remember we could not talk to neighbors. They would try to get close to our house. They would never get past like the front steps. They would always come up with an excuse. And neighbors started noticing things. So we'd be out, gosh, 3 a.m. in the morning, you know, cleaning, and as night fell, you know, chickens would roost in the trees that we had. So um, they would notice that we had an attorney that lived in our neighborhood, and she would get home from court um, pretty, you know, early in the morning, so about 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. And she would notice we'd be out with flashlights, our hair was chopped off, we wore clothes like I was 90 pounds, and she would buy us like size 14 women's clothes from Goodwill, and we'd roll them up. We didn't have shoes. Like, if I could just paint the picture, like, clearly we were not kids who were in school during the day. And we looked really disheveled and dirty all the time and just working all the time. To keep us working, and awake, she'd give us caffeine pills to stay awake to do the job. But this neighbor noticed something, and this is what I want to focus on like on paying attention and noticing when things around you are not normal. Um, she noticed that, and with another neighbor, they got together and discussed us and the situation on how to proceed. Um, it's quite funny because I always make the joke about the nosy neighbor, funny neighbor who has binoculars and she's interested about what everyone else is doing. But in this case, it saved our lives. So a nosy neighbor essentially was the reason that we got rescued. And that was because she paid attention and she acted upon that. It's the action, sometimes we notice things, but we don't take action because we think, oh, I'm just being paranoid, or, it's none of my business to get involved. Well, your nosiness could help someone. Really, it really could. And in our case, it did. So they got together and called social services. Well, let me backtrack. Mercedes' biological daughter was married to a man who lived with us. Oh wait, she probably wasn't married, but she had a boyfriend who lived with us at one point. And before he left, I remember him saying goodbye to us and that we were very strong and that things would be okay. And I didn't know what he meant by that, but a couple days later, Mercedes said a social worker is going to come by. Here's where things get a little interesting, because the social worker did not come out on an investigation, but a report. So she got a tip. So she made an appointment with our perpetrator. And what do you think happened? Just like the movies, it's something out of the movies. Like, she staged everything. She cleaned, she purchased food, actual food. She bought us rollerblades and said, okay, the woman's going to be here at 2 p.m. At 1:45, I want you girls outside on the road rollerblading. You're going to wear these clothes, go up and down, rollerblade up and down. And when they ask you what you had for breakfast, she'd basically feed us lies of what we were supposed to say if we were asked. I just remember the day before the social worker got there, we were lectured on what to say, what not to say, what happened. She said, if someone asks you who does the cleaning and cooking, say me. I'm like, okay. So social worker got there the next day and we listened. We did exactly what she told us to do. And the social worker said, okay, well, there's nothing wrong here. Seems fine. And left. So it was another 3 years, I think, before this now neighbor noticed something, and she called social services. Now this time there was no appointment made. I just say it's God's timing, and God had his hand there, because Mercedes was running an errand. She was getting chicken food at Tractor Supply. I'm still traumatized by Tractor Supply, but anyway. So she was out, and I noticed this little white car driving slowly by our house. And the women stopped and they walked out. I was inside, and my sisters were talking to these women. And I walked out and I heard they were saying stuff about our life. And I thought, we can't talk to them. Like, that's not allowed. Like, she's going to find out we're going to die. Like, and then I approached them too. And, I just felt this is our time. So I just started talking too. I just started saying, oh, yeah, they said, we've heard some things. Do you go to school? Why are you here during the day? Are you cleaning something? And it was a nasty mess, like chicken poop everywhere and rams, and a shed was being built. At that day, we actually had men building a shed for the goats and the ram. And the women were just asking questions. And then my older sister started talking, and my young sister started talking, and then I started like talking more. And we said, please leave, because she's going to be here any second. She's going to come around this corner. And this was before we had cell phones, and we didn't have access to cell phones or the internet. I think some survivors or victims might have access to that now, but that was not something we had access to. Like, we were very, very isolated. So they said, okay, we're going to be back this weekend. Don't tell her we said anything. One of the social workers handed me her business card. And so they left, and I hid the business card. And I had a little box, and I hid the business card. And when Mercedes got home, of course, she was yelling, curse words and yelling at us and everything. And she decided to take a nap. She often did. She took a nap. And it was such a surreal feeling, because we thought, we know something she doesn't know. Like, it was just a glimmer of hope. Yeah. Sorry. Anyhow, I apologize. Later that evening, the social workers were back. I apologize.
No. You do not have to apologize to us. You take your
Would you like to take a moment?
No. I just, at different parts of the story,
Yeah.
So later that night, those two social workers were back, but this time they had a detective and another lady with them. And we were surprised, because we thought, oh, they're going to be back this weekend, but they were back that night. Mercedes was sleeping upstairs. I remember being in the closet and seeing them, and my sister went to the door, my older sister, and said, okay, I know who you are, but who do I tell her you are? And the lead social worker said, you tell her that we have a warrant to search the place, that she has a minor in the house and we need to talk to her. All I remember is my sister going upstairs, knocking on the door, and Mercedes obviously waking up from a sleep and just screaming like curse words and like freaking out basically. And I almost look back and it's quite comical because the amount of damage and how gross the house was could never have been fixed in one night. But I remember her saying, Hope, get this, get the eggs and the get the eggs and the straw out of the bathtub, because the bathtub wasn't used to take showers. It was obviously it was a chicken house. So clean this, get that, get the guinea pigs, and it was just like, okay, you're not gonna clean it in like 2 seconds. So that's quite funny when I look back. But she was freaking out. She put on a robe because she slept naked. She was strange. And she comes down, and here she tries to paint who she is, right? So she goes out to her Lincoln. She had a Lincoln car. She pops the trunk and she takes out her fur coat. It was a real fur coat. And this is, she was trying to like show how powerful she was. Part of her tactic. So she she's barefoot and she's walking back to the house. The detectives are still outside and she's walking through chicken poop. And with her big fur coat, I'm just trying to paint a picture of how this was. And we're running around cleaning, and they finally come inside. And one of the social workers was pregnant. So I remember her like, we didn't know how awful we smelled so bad of like animals. We didn't shower and, there were chickens in the house and dogs, pit bulls. We had a lot of pit bulls. So, they walked around the house and they finally said, okay, we're taking the minor. We're taking her out of here. And Mercedes was freaking out. You can't do that. And they're like, yes, ma'am, we can legally. She's in our custody. And my sister and I was 18 and my older sister was 22. So by law, we were adults. So we heard they were going to take our youngest sister, and my older sister went to the social worker and said, well, what about us? Like, you're taking our sister, but what about the two of us? And the social worker said, well, you're adults. You can leave anytime. We looked at her and said, we can't leave anytime. We can't leave. We need help. And she said, okay, grab whatever you want in a bag, whatever your belongings are in a plastic bag, go to the car. We're like, okay, we didn't have much, but we're throwing whatever we can in some plastic bags. My younger sister was already at the car. Now it's my older sister and I walking out. And before we get down the staircase, like outside the staircase to the driveway, Mercedes is facing us with her hands like in a praying, stance. And she's muttering under her breath, I'm so sorry. Please stay. Like, I didn't mean to hurt you. What about the animals? What about the animals? And, and me, I'm just like, F the animals. Like, I'm out of here. So excuse my language, but I marched my way. I was like, nope. My older sister, though, she shuffled a little bit because she was very loyal. Being the oldest, she definitely felt a lot more she felt more responsible, I guess, being the eldest, and she's a very loyal person, and it really affected her. So we essentially had to push her in the car. And I remember from that moment backing out of the driveway and leaving. She was just standing, the Mercedes was just standing there. And from there on, it was a long process. We got interviewed, interrogated. Social services did not believe our story. The director of social service did not believe our story. I was like, look at us. Like, look how we look and we smell and we're not in school. And like, why would I make that up? And they interrogated us together, then separately, and our stories matched up. So it's just really eye-opening to look back and see how how far we've come in the movement of fighting trafficking, because we were the first case in our county, I think maybe North Carolina, I'm not really sure, of trafficking. They did not know what to do with us. We were illegal, but we were minors when we were here illegally. Um, there was no protocol, there was no assessment on trafficking. You know, it was just very foreign to everyone. Um, but my mother now, so we were adopted by the lead social worker on the case that night. She did have to quit her job in the county she was in because it was a conflict of interest. Um, the judge did give her legal custody of my younger sister. And since then, it's been 13 years now since the situation, and you know, we're extremely blessed. You know, we've learned a lot, and now I just want to, you know, help other people, and I get to do that with the Ursus Institute. Um, love them. We've got, you know, we've got about 3 people we're helping now, and it's just amazing to be able to see where they are and understand where they are, and like, I was there. Yep, I remember that. And like, okay, here's what we could probably do that might help you, you know. Um, because in a situation like the girls, like we're helping now, you know, if you say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you're so strong. I can't imagine what you went through," and you know, they're strong because they had to be. They didn't have a choice, you know. So it's hard sometimes to move forward because you've been held back so long, and you feel like you're starting everything very late in life. So you're maturing very late. But in other ways, you're much more mature than other people. But in some ways, like in society, as society sees it, we have a lot more work to do, you know, to how do you get a job, like skills? How can I drive? I've never driven before. How do I write a resume? How do I hold a job? Will it affect me? I've been so isolated so long, you know. How do I have a conversation? How do I be independent, you know? How do I not let the past immobilize me from moving forward? So I definitely personally like to focus on forward moving, getting the girls that we're working with now to set goals, you know, help them reach those goals, create a safe place for them. Because I think one of the things that helped me was actually not counseling. I'll be really honest with you. I was against counseling because I thought, here's a sweet little old lady, you know, trying to help me. And in my head, I'm like, she has no idea. She told me to draw my inner child, and I just thought, oh, you know, in my little mind, I thought, you're not going to understand me. So I was definitely against it for a long time, not in a really bad way. I thought, oh, this is not going to help me. I am now in counseling, by the way. I think it's wonderful. But I go every other week, and nothing even major. It's just awesome to have someone to talk to, you know, who's not your family and who can give you a different perspective. And but I turned to exercise. That personally helped me. I just knew every time I exercised, I felt so good. I felt so amazing. And, you know, come to find out, movement and exercise releases endorphins. Um, and there is science behind it, which is coming to light now. And so that's one of the services I offer the girls in this area. But yeah, so yeah, is there anything else that you would like me to go over or you have questions about?
So, thank you, first of all. Thank you so much. You really are a strong person, and beautiful inside and out. I know we're just a coalition in a small town that's far away from you, but we all really care about you, and you know, anything that we could ever do. Uh,
Thank you, Deb. I think your coalition's amazing. I
so
love hearing about it.
you have addressed a lot of the questions that I have from the students. So
Okay.
I'm kind of going to go through a few of these, but while we do that, for those of you who might have additional questions, if you can put them in the chat, maybe Betsy, you can start paying attention to those and help us get through trying to get everything out of your brain that we possibly can, and your experience, because it's just going to help us. One thing I kind of thought might be helpful to address was when you and I and Betsy talked that first time, and you ended up reporting what you thought was a potential instance of human trafficking that you noted. Do you remember? Could you explain to everyone from your perspective how you had been through it, you had lived it, and now you wanted to help someone else? How did it go for you, and what were some of the delays? And get from the perspective of, what 2 months means to someone being trafficked versus someone who has a normal, stable life. If you
Yes,
could maybe give us a little bit of that story, we'll start there.
absolutely. And I meant to actually go over that and share that. Um, so if the stats are right on trafficking, it's happening right in front of our eyes. So right in our neighborhoods, right around us. North Carolina is the number 5, it's top 5 state for trafficking. And that being because we've got the I-95, we've got 74 that goes throughout the whole United States, right? I think down to Florida, Texas, I think. But our highway system is the perfect ground for like dropping kids off, trafficking, like Lumberton, that kind of area. So we're still number 5, which is terrible out of all the states for trafficking. So if that's the case, then it's happening right here. So I went out one time and I met this man and woman, and I don't know why they opened up to me, but they did, and they shared a story about their neighbor. Their neighbor sounded a little sketchy. They told me the neighbor owned a car dealership. They would tell me that. They said he had a woman living with him that was not his wife, that his wife moved back to their home country with their children, but they didn't know the story about that. But he had another woman with their children living with him. And I thought, okay, that's really strange. Then they also told me in conversations he made like sexual innuendos, like talking, like tying the woman's hands behind her back and things like that. And I was like, wow, okay, that would tip me off. Um, so I said, well, would you mind giving me your address? Because I know someone who could probably check that out. Because that sounds like some sort of trafficking, if, definitely an abusive situation, even if it's not trafficking. And the woman was like, okay, sure, sure, sure. The next day, I text her, I was like, hey, we met last night. You shared this story with me. I know where he works, but do you mind, can I ask again for the address? I said, I will not bring your name up. I will report it. They won't know you said anything, because that is actually a big concern for people, is having the perpetrator know that they're the one who said something, because they're afraid for their life, which makes sense. I can see that. But she refused, and she's like, then she backtracked. She said, "Oh, I think I'm just reading into things. He's probably just a little weird. Like, it's fine, And I said again, please give me the information. Like, if it's not something, okay. If he turns out to be just a strange guy, okay, then we did our part. But she refused, and I couldn't, do anything else. 2 months go by. 2 months go by. I don't know this girl really. I'm not very close with her. I just met her that one time, and she texted me. She said, did you see the news? I said, no. And she sent me the article. Her neighbor was busted for trafficking. And it kind of infuriated me a little bit. And I basically said, hey, do you remember when I tried to ask you for this? And I said, do you know how 2 months what could have happened in 2 months?
Right.
Like 2 months for us, I actually don't really remember what I did 2 months ago. Most of us don't probably remember. Um, but 2 months for her and the children, oh my gosh, was she being raped? Was she being hit? What was happening? Like one day in a situation like that it feels like an eternity. So I told her, listen, we could have saved this woman 2 months ago. I said, I don't believe that we met by chance. I believe there was a reason that I met you, um, you know, because I would be someone who did something about it because what have I experienced? So I think that situation really showed me, wow, it's really happening here. Like I see the numbers, Polaris does a lot of reports on numbers and you don't really know what's accurate. Um, but it's happening right around us. And you just have to open your eyes and listen to that gut feeling, because there is a gut feeling that you get something's off, something doesn't feel right. I'm going to say the action part is what people usually don't do. So even if they think something's off, they don't want to be nosy, they don't want to be jeopardize their life and their family, and which those are, I can understand that, fearing for your safety. But I also think it was a lesson for the woman that I had met that night, that wow, this
Right.
really was something. Um,
So I
I
have a question kind of along those lines, about helping victims, helping others, and asking what were any red flags you noticed. I think that was more thinking of you from a different perspective, but coming out now, if you were to help people understand what the red flags are, you probably have them instinctually, having been, being a survivor. But are there a few things or a list or a few things that you would share that these are the red flags?
absolutely. So although we were very isolated in our situation, we were pretty much bound to the house. Um, she would take us out, but at random times. So Walmart was 24 hours. So it'd be 2 a.m. in the morning. So, it's less crowded. So we would be given a list and we'd go shopping. We would fill the car up with gas at the gas station. So we did go to Tractor Supply. So those kind of places, she would take us to run her errands while she stayed in the car.
Okay.
Um, I will say, I remember getting strange looks. We looked disheveled. Like maybe some survivors or victims don't, but we definitely looked like our hands were calloused, and we had cuts, and my hair was chopped off because she would chop our hair for punishment. So we didn't have hairstyles. It was chop boy style, different lengths. So I think it was pretty obvious that, you know, we didn't look right. We smelt. I can't imagine how awful we smelled. Chickens, oh, so bad, And the bathtub was used for not showers. So, um, I remember my sister went to the gas station one time, and her hands, oh, they were so uh, dry and cracked, almost bleeding. And the cashier said, "Oh, would you want some hand cream?" And I thought, to me, that would have been a red flag. Like, why are you quiet? You're looking at the ground, you know, you don't really make eye contact. Um, you don't elaborate if people ask questions. So I think part of having a feeling that something's happening is asking questions, because I would never, and I'll tell you this now, I would never have come out and said, oh yeah, I'm being, I didn't know what trafficking was, right? So I didn't know I was being trafficked. That was news to me years later. So I knew it wasn't right. I could feel this is not normal. I would see mothers and children, um, holding hands or going shopping and thinking, oh, that's what it's supposed to be like. So I do think there were definitely big signs with us. If you are out with the perpetrator, let's say I was at a restaurant, which never happened, but let's say I did work the restaurant industry, and there were a couple of cases that um, I found to be interesting and I helped with. But if, let's say, the server asks me a question, but my perpetrator answers for me,
Right.
that's a sign too. So if you're with someone and you feel like they're not talking for themselves, or they get shot down when they try to speak, or they don't even try at all, but they just seem to do whatever they're told, that would be a red flag. You can tell by the demeanor. You can tell
Okay.
by the demeanor.
Yeah, some of the things you mentioned are being echoed by people in our coalition that work in the, healthcare industry, hospitality. So, but it
Oh yeah.
sounds like from your perspective, like you felt like people should have looked at you and your sisters and known something wasn't right, you know?
Well, when I look back, I'm not in that situation anymore.
Right.
It's been 13 something years later, and I think, well, if I had seen that, I put myself in this, if I had seen a girl who looked like me, like my sisters and behaved like that, I would have been tipped off. Like if I lived in the neighborhood
Right.
here, from my neighborhood, and I saw a girl, hair chopped off or size 18 clothes, was 90 pounds soaking wet, it would, but, my background gives me that, insight.
Right.
Uh, well, I'm very in tune to that. So, it's not to anyone's fault that they don't notice that. I think maybe train yourself, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
to look for that. And then I just had another person reach out to me, and I was trying to help them with a case they thought was trafficking. Um, and I called the trafficking hotline and everything. And
I was literally about to just ask you this. Can you explain to everyone what happened when you called the trafficking help? And like what
oh,
you do when you think you have a case or something and you want to report it. What is your response? Because we talk about this a lot, like who to call and how it works or doesn't. So
so this is actually where I am now. That's my frustration because I'm on the other side of it now. Now I'm like, okay, how do we actually help? And that's why I loved hearing you guys and Rebecca and Robin and everyone who's actively doing things and trying to figure things out. So what do you do? So okay, now you've heard something. You think, okay, I'm going to take action. Well, I never called the hotline before, but I worked with the commission, North Carolina Trafficking Commission, and we used that as a resource. I thought, okay, that's awesome, a place where you can call and they're trained in trauma and
mhm.
they'll get someone out there. And it took me 50 minutes. I was on hold for 50 minutes before someone came onto the phone. And I thought, oh my gosh, if a victim had 2 minutes on their own, found a phone, pay phone, asked to use someone's phone on the streets, maybe,
Right.
if they had 2 minutes and they saw the number for the trafficking line, they don't have 50 minutes. I'm so glad I had the opportunity to call the hotline because I thought, this is the resource we're giving out to people. I'm sorry, but that's not going to be the place, that
Right.
I'm going to be inclined to call. I called 2 weeks later and they basically said I didn't have enough information or evidence. And let me tell you, I definitely did. So I think that is my frustration too, along with you guys, is then you think, okay, I'm going to call the police. Well, they're not all trained,
Right.
in taking cases and questions about trafficking specifically. Um,
And you mentioned a little bit about making sure we can get law enforcement to a certain level. I think Rebecca, you mentioned that as well. Um, and in your story, you talked about when your first night of freedom, um, and how it was almost a bit of an interrogation. How did you? I guess at what point did you feel like it was going to get better? Was it when you left the house? Was it talking to people that seemed like they cared, or was, did the law enforcement part of it make it worse, or was that just a piece that you knew that you had to go through to get to the other side? I guess I'm trying to
Yeah,
understand how that piece of it made you feel in the whole process. And hopefully that's improved with some education over time. But if you could just share a little bit about how that part of it
yeah,
went.
absolutely. No, those are great questions that, um, yeah, when I think back to that, um, I definitely remember the police, the detective. So we worked with two detectives. I didn't really talk to any other police because social workers had already taken us. So we were talking directly with the social workers. Then a few of them, um, and they were split down the middle. Like obviously, my mom now, she believed us, and honestly, just her demeanor was a light to me. Like she was very lighthearted. She laughed. She offered me M&Ms. Like she made a joke, and I just thought, oh, someone who's lighthearted and make a joke like that goes a long way. If
Yeah.
you're lighthearted, and because we're not used to that, like it's depressing and sad and scary all the time. To see someone who's just like happy and like jovial, and that was just like, oh wow. Um, and small acts, just small acts like you care, offering you a piece of gum, like small things like that really, like I noticed that, wow. The detectives, I yeah, there was interrogation, but I think we were more like telling the story over and over and over and not knowing, what's gonna happen, Um, I think they were very confused. They didn't really understand, and you could tell this was like, what is this, like, not that they weren't mean or anything about it. They just didn't, it was very foreign to them, this
Right.
idea of trafficking. And I'm sure it's changed now, at least they've heard of it, right?
Right. Hopefully.
uh, hopefully. But I think the disbelief that something of this magnitude could happen to someone in their county, to someone where they drive by that neighborhood. Like I think that is more the feeling I got in the beginning of like the social workers especially. Um, the police, I just think they were kind of neutral, honestly, to you know, not against it, not like, oh, this doesn't happen, but just uneducated really about it.
Right.
Um, yeah, so the interrogations weren't bad, they were just very draining.
Okay.
Uh, you know.
We're getting a couple questions in, I think, from our law enforcement side, as far as how the case went out. Did she ever get charged with anything? Were you involved in like a long legal piece at the end? Maybe just a little bit of how it did end up.
Yeah, so what was amazing, what I know really helps survivors, honestly, are the resources, because even my parents didn't know what to do. They had no idea. They've got three girls living with them now. You know, my mom left her job, so now we're three mouths to feed, one income, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so they were lost. So the people helping sometimes don't even know what to do. So um, they had a friend who wrote a news article, the local newspaper, and that basically helped shed some light on they need services. Like we had a dentist say that he would clean our teeth. We did end up getting Medicaid, so social services did offer us some um, Medicaid and um, transportation. you
Mhm.
know Eventually we realized there was something called the GED. I had never done high school, so that was amazing. So I remember a woman picked us up every morning from the house, and she would take us to the GED center, and just, and that's, you think that's a small thing, that's a huge thing. I couldn't have done school, like, um what else we did through the news article also, uh, helped us get a legal attorney, and she helped us figure out our green card situation. Um, and obviously, it was a very long process, but we couldn't afford that, you know. Um, we hadn't worked, not we worked, but not by society's standards, like we weren't getting paid for the work we had done all those 13 years. And then we also, FBI also reached out and really helped, and he ended up getting my mom over from England and, talking to her. And so, okay, so to Mercedes, they, the U.S. Marshals had the borders flagged. Um, and we thought maybe she'd go back to Spain, where she had a house and where we had originally been from right before we came to the US.
Right.
But she wasn't there. We were trying to locate her biological daughter. We couldn't find her. And someone spotted her in Bulgaria, random place, but she was spotted there. She actually tried to cross the border. So I think to go back to England, I believe.
Okay.
And the U.S. Marshals, they were tipped off and they went off and they got her and they brought her back to the U.S. Right here in Charlotte, she was held in federal prison. I think there was a total of 4 years. She had 3 counts of child trafficking against her, like human servitude, domestic servitude. And this is the frustrating part because I knew she would plead insanity. And she did. So part of those 2 of those 4 years, she was taken to New York, and I guess there's a mental facility that she was evaluated at, and they basically deemed her too incompetent to stand trial. So by this point, I had started college, and I was actually 3 blocks away from where she was, which is very surreal. Like, but they let her go. They let her go back to England, where she's, I guess, a citizen of originally. And it was really quite infuriating. I thought, how? And they said, no, what really was upsetting is that they said she was a low threat to society. That's the part I couldn't understand. She's a low threat to society, yet she's got 3 counts of child neglect and trafficking charges against her. That happened 13 years, for 13 years. How is she a low threat? She's older. That doesn't mean anything. Like, but honestly, like when you look back and you think about, well, what kind of person could do that? They probably had some mental issues. Like, how can you be that evil? So that's how that ended. So.
Well, there were a lot of questions about what happened to her. I think because we want to think that she's locked up somewhere, but
No.
we definitely want to hear more about you, though, and not to end anything with notes on her. A couple questions about your sisters.
Oh, yeah.
You're in touch, I'm assuming, and everyone is doing well now, hopefully.
Oh, yeah, we've been very close. Very close. Like, that, I mean, situation like that just bonds you, like, obviously we have our sister moments and,
Right.
But they're both doing really well. Jazz, her name's Jasmine, my older sister. She's bought a house and she's living in Cornelius, and she's very involved with her church. She's got an amazing voice and she uses that for weddings and, funerals too. And but she's awesome. And then my younger sister, she just had her first baby. She's married, had her first baby. I know, we never thought either of us would ever have a baby. So that's awesome. That's been a little challenging for her, like dealing with the mental setbacks of Mercedes would tell us, you could never have a baby, I curse your womb, things like that, but
Right.
so it's really beautiful to see that she's overcoming that, and a fear like in the back of our heads that we could never be good moms because of what we saw growing up, but she's completely proving Mercedes wrong. Yeah, and she's able to work from home now because of COVID. So, but she got a degree in communication, super smart. My young sister had a full 4-year ride to Elon University, just she took all of that. There's another thing about like abuse because people handle it differently. So she channeled all of that into her studies and into learning, and so that really helped her out, right? So
Mhm.
yeah.
I know you mentioned exercise as being, one of the things that you use. Did you have any other coping mechanisms that seem to be helpful?
Music,
Music.
music, huge, huge, even now. Um, I think music is very, very therapeutic. We're actually trying to offer that to the girls. Um, we're helping right now. Um, there's just something about music that's you can connect with. Um, writing, journaling is huge
Okay.
to get it out of here, and onto paper. And it's just something about releasing that. That is very therapeutic. Um, exercising, honestly, like there are going to be bad days. Um, days you're like, oh man, I'm how old and I'm now getting to this, or man, it's the setbacks, or for me, I'm terrible at math. You know what I mean? So I'm graduating college, but I mean, that was a struggle. And I thought, wow, if I had 12 years of math, I would have been able to do this easy. Um, so small things like that. But you can't let that. For me, I'm very like strict on myself. You got 24 hours to feel your feelings. Yes, okay, that's an issue, but you've got to move forward because if you stay in the past, it just sinks you down.
Hmm.
Very, very hard to get out of that black hole. Um, so I really try to focus on moving forward and, you know,
Well, I guess if I have maybe a bit of a last question, or maybe us seeking to learn as much as possible. We have a lot of students here, so sort of the younger generation, and then we have the local community. Do you have any advice for us? And specifically, maybe into two different categories for the students. As they are getting ready to, graduate and go out into the world soon, hopefully having this knowledge and this perspective will help them. And then for us that are just looking at it, from a local perspective here, and hoping to I don't know, take a bite out of it. What do you give us your bits of advice, if you can think of any?
I would say for the younger generation, um, to take it seriously, because I think I'm a little paranoid and I'm a little overprotective and overly like I notice everything around me. So I might be on the other spectrum of it,
Right.
but it's it's a healthy fear because it's definitely real and it's to your disadvantage if you think it's not going to happen to me and it's not going to happen around me. If you have that mindset,
Right.
let me just tell you, you do not want to be in that situation when it happens. So I would say social media specifically, be really careful. A lot of grooming, a lot of introductions into trafficking happen there. Um, monitor, who's following you, who's, interacting with you, who's DMing you, like instant messaging, what are they asking you? Like, know your boundaries, learn to decipher what you can trust and what sounds fishy. If it sounds fishy or too good to be true, you know what the saying is, it usually is. So I would say for the younger generation, really equip yourself with not thinking, oh, it happened. That's something that happens in like, the other side of the world in like poor countries. Like, that doesn't happen in America. Like,
Right.
no, it happens in America. Um, and I would say even more so because there is a lot of money and status, and usually the trafficking rings are unfortunately involving high status people with a lot of power and a lot of money. Um, so I would say equip yourself, educate yourself, but more importantly, notice your surroundings, um, and just be careful, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
be
No,
careful
it's
who your
great.
friends are.
And our students, they're working on a project to start helping educate high schoolers. So more like on a peer-to-peer level. So everything
So,
you just said is great message there, for them to help the younger, even younger
yeah,
generation. So
yeah, I have noticed, and I've heard, like some parents are a little apprehensive to talk about trafficking with their children because, they're 5, they're 6, they're too young to. That's dark. That's evil.
mhm,
That's not good to talk to my child about. And although, it's a difficult subject because I've got nieces too, and they're
mhm,
like, you don't look like my dad, you don't look like, they're asking questions now,
right.
Um, but it is important because those are the ages that it's so awful and sad, but there is a way to tell them and to,
Mhm.
because it unfortunately is the reality of life in our world. Um, so yeah. So you got this, parents. You got this.
And then to the coalition members, we're trying, as you saw from the beginning of our meeting. I
So
guess
great.
that's probably a big piece of it, but any thoughts there, or
I say,
just keep working?
okay, yeah. Honest, yeah. You'll probably feel a little discouraged at times that things aren't going the way maybe you think they should, or as fast, or a lot with people who are trying to do a movement of anti-trafficking. You work together, so maybe you feel like you're doing your part, but someone else isn't doing their part.
Right.
Yeah, that's frustrating. I totally get it. Um, but the fact that you're doing something, honestly, you're helping people. You
Okay.
really are. And I say just keep the faith, um, continue to work together. I think it definitely takes a bunch of people, like volunteering. I can't help people on my own, like
Mhm.
they say it takes a village. It really does,
Mhm. Yeah.
services, like if you can't give money to an organization, okay, maybe you can teach someone how to build a resume. Maybe
Right.
you could just sit with people or survivors. I don't know if you work directly with survivors at the moment, but um, they they matter, that you care, that they have a place in this world, that
Mhm.
everything that happened wasn't for nothing. Because it happened, you can't change that. But moving forward, it didn't happen for nothing. Like you can make an impact also in the world. Um, I just honestly, from everything I heard, I'm like, wow, I want to be where you guys are. Like maybe I've experienced it, sure, but I'm going back to school for criminal justice and homeland security, and I want to be able to do something with that in a real way to help.
You already are. You really are.
I don't know,
And
but
we
um,
thank you so much for sharing your story. It's
thank
inspiring, definitely. So I'll turn it over to Betsy for, I guess, sort of closing it out and giving you a final thank you, but hopefully we'll be in touch
you,
soon.
Deb. Absolutely. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you. All right, over to you, Betsy.
Thanks, Deb. Hope, I can't begin to tell you what you've done today. You've impacted, you've educated, you've shown us. We talk about this and we hear about this, but to hear this through the eyes of somebody who lived it and lived it, I can't believe, for 13 years. How you walked out the other end and have become this amazing woman that you are today is nothing short of a modern day miracle. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. As I said, we did record this and we're going to make this available for educational purposes for those